90 seconds. That's all it took. Vista Airways bled $5 billion. You saw the cell phone video, the passenger manhandled, humiliated. But you don't know the real story. It wasn't about a bumped seat. It was about arrogance, a cashmere hoodie, and a flight attendant named Preston who thought the quiet man in 1A didn't belong. Big mistake. Preston didn't know he was bullying the man who held the airline's lifeline. A silent billionaire. No shouting, no struggle. Just one phone call. Now, an entire fleet grounded. What Preston doesn't realize, his cruelty won't just cost him his job, it'll usher in a reckoning no one saw coming. The rain lashed against the reinforced glass of JFK's Terminal 4, creating a blurred grey mosaic of the tarmac outside. Inside the exclusive Diamond Sky Lounge, the atmosphere was a hermetically sealed bubble of privilege. It smelled of espresso, expensive cologne, and the quiet hum of anxiety that only the very wealthy possess. Julian Thorne sat in the far corner, away from the buffet and the complimentary champagne bar. To the untrained eye, Julian looked like a mistake in the seating chart. He wasn't wearing the standard uniform of the first-class traveler. No bespoke Italian suit, no flashing Rolex Submariner, no loud phone calls about mergers and acquisitions meant to be overheard by nearby women. Julian wore a charcoal grey cashmere hoodie that cost more than most people's cars, though it bore no logo. He wore faded denim and a pair of scuffed Common Project sneakers. A black baseball cap was pulled low over his eyes. He was 42, African-American, with a stillness about him that people often mistook for passivity. He was reading a physical book, a rare sight in 2024, about the history of maritime law. He was tired. It had been a grueling week in New York, finalizing the details of a hostile takeover of a mid-sized tech firm. A deal that would net his private equity firm, Obsidian Capital, roughly $300 million in the next quarter. But Julian didn't care about the money anymore. He just wanted to get home to London to see his daughter's piano recital. He checked his ticket. Seat 1A. The best seat on the plane. He had paid full fare, $14,000 one way, specifically to ensure he could sleep for the entire 6-hour flight. "Can I clear that for you, sir?" Julian looked up. A lounge attendant, polite but scanning him with a hint of confusion, pointed to his empty water glass. "Please," Julian said, his voice deep and calm. "And could I get a sparkling water? No ice." "I'll check if we have any left." "We're prioritizing the pre-flight service for the senator's party," the attendant said, gesturing vaguely toward a loud group of men in suits near the window. Julian didn't blink. He didn't say, "I own the building this lounge is in." He didn't say, "I'm a Diamond Key member." He just nodded. "Whenever you can." He was used to it. The invisible friction. The assumption that he was an athlete, a rapper, or a lottery winner. Or worse, an employee traveling on a company pass. Julian Thorne preferred the invisibility. In his line of work, being underestimated was a tactical advantage. It allowed him to walk into boardrooms and listen while his opponents dug their own graves. At 6:15 p.m., the boarding call for Vista Airways Flight 882 to London Heathrow came over the PA system. Julian gathered his leather weekender bag. He walked toward the gate, moving with an easy, athletic grace. As he approached the first-class lane, a gate agent held up a hand without looking up from her screen. "Economy boarding is in Zone 4, sir. That's going to be another 20 minutes. Julian stopped. He didn't sigh. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his boarding pass, sliding it onto the scanner. The machine beeped a happy, affirmative green tone. "Welcome, Mr. Thorne. Seat 1A. The gate agent looked at the screen, then up at Julian, her face flushing slightly. There was no apology, just a tight lip pursing. "Go ahead." Julian walked down the jet bridge. He could feel the cold air of the tunnel, the smell of jet fuel. He stepped onto the plane, turning left into the first-class cabin. It was a sanctuary of cream leather and walnut trim. There were only 8 suites. He found 1A, stowed his bag, and sat down. He put on his noise-cancelling headphones, closed his eyes, and exhaled. He was ready to disappear for 6 hours. But up in the galley, the lead purser, Preston Walsh, was staring at the manifest with a vein throbbing in his temple. Preston was a man who prided himself on the standards of air travel. He missed the golden age where people dressed up to fly. He hated hoodies, he hated sneakers. And he especially hated when standard passengers clogged up his premium cabin. "We have a problem," Preston said to the junior flight attendant, Sarah. "What is it?" Sarah asked, arranging the pre-flight mimosas. The pilot just radioed. "We have 2 dead-heading captains who need to get to London to fly the return leg of the 777. They need first-class seats for rest requirements." "We're full, Preston. 8 of 8, Sarah said. Preston peeked through the curtain. He saw the senator in 2F. He saw the famous actress in 2A. He saw the CEO of a heavy logistics company in 1F. And then in 1A, he saw Julian. Hoodie, cap, sleeping before the plane even pushed back. Preston smirked. He checked his tablet. Thorne, Julian. One-way ticket. Booked yesterday. No frequent flyer status listed on the manifest. Julian often booked through third-party concierges to protect his privacy, meaning his titanium status didn't always flash on the crew iPad. "We need 2 seats, Preston said, smoothing his vest. "I know exactly where we're starting." "Preston, you can't just move a revenue passenger," Sarah whispered nervously. "It's against protocol unless they volunteer." "Watch me," Preston said. "He looks like he's lucky to be here anyway. Probably an upgrade error or a miles ticket. I'll handle it." Preston Walsh walked down the aisle, his shoes clicking aggressively on the floor. He stopped at seat 1A. He didn't lean in to whisper politely. He tapped Julian on the shoulder, hard. The invisible titan opened his eyes. Julian slid one ear cup of his headphones back. He didn't sit up. He just looked at the man standing over him. Preston Walsh had the kind of face that looked like it had been designed by a committee of boarding school bullies. Sharp chin, slicked back blonde hair, and a smile that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. "Sir," Preston said, his voice loud enough that the other passengers looked up. "I need to see your boarding pass." Julian reached into his pocket, retrieved the stub, and handed it over without a word. Preston looked at it, feigning a study of the details. "Right. As I suspected. Mr. Thorne, unfortunately, we have an overbooking situation. We require this seat for operational flight crew members who need to reach London. I'm going to need you to gather your things and exit the aircraft." It wasn't a question, it was a command. Julian blinked. "I paid for this seat." "I understand that," Preston said, his tone dripping with condescension like he was explaining algebra to a toddler. "But airline policy states that in the event of operational necessity, we have the right to re-accommodate passengers. We have a voucher for you, $800 and a seat on the flight tomorrow morning." "I have a meeting in London tomorrow at 9 a.m., Julian said calmly. "I am not taking a flight tomorrow." "Sir, let's not make this difficult," Preston said, crossing his arms. "We have essential crew members who need to fly. You are the lowest priority on the manifest." "Lowest priority," Julian repeated. "Based on what metric?" "Based on the fact that I am the lead purser and I am making the decision," Preston snapped. He was losing patience. He wanted the cabin cleared so he could serve champagne to the senator. "Now please, grab your bag." The cabin was silent. The senator in 2F lowered his newspaper. The actress in 2A peered over her sunglasses. They were watching, judging. But they weren't helping. In their minds, Julian didn't quite fit either. If someone had to go, surely it was the guy in the hoodie. Julian adjusted his position, sitting up straighter. "I am not moving. I suggest you ask for volunteers, offer a higher compensation. The law requires you to offer up to 400% of the fare before involuntary denial of boarding." Preston's face turned a shade of crimson. This passenger knew the rules. That was annoying. "I don't have time to haggle with you like we're in a street market. This is a federal aircraft. If you do not vacate this seat, I will have you removed. Do you understand what that means?" "I do," Julian said. "Do you?" Preston laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Is that a threat?" "It's a question," Julian said. "You are making a decision based on visuals, not protocol. If you check your system properly, you'll see—" "I've seen enough," Preston interrupted. He turned to Sarah, who was hovering terrified in the galley. "Call the gate. Tell them we have a non-compliant passenger in 1A. We need Port Authority, now." Sarah hesitated. "Preston, maybe we can ask Mr. Henderson in 1F? He said he wasn't in a rush earlier." "No," Preston hissed. It's a matter of principle now. He thinks he can dictate terms on my aircraft. Call them. Julian put his headphones back on. He picked up his book. He turned the page. Inside his chest, his heart was beating slowly, steadily. He wasn't afraid. He was disappointed. He had bought Vista Airways stock 3 years ago when it was trading at $12 a share. He had watched it climb to $45. He knew the company's debt structure better than the CEO, a man named Arthur Vane. He knew that Vista was currently in delicate negotiations with Vanguardian Holdings to refinance a massive $5 billion loan that was coming due next month. If that loan wasn't refinanced, Vista would default. Their credit rating would plunge to junk status. The stock would evaporate. Julian knew this because Obsidian Capital, his firm, was the majority shareholder of Vanguardian Holdings. Technically, in a very convoluted but legally binding way, Julian Thorne owned the debt on the very plane he was sitting in. He owned the lease on the seats. He owned the mortgage on the engines. But right now, he was just a guy in a hoodie about to be assaulted. 10 minutes passed. The air in the cabin grew heavy. The other passengers whispered. "Just get off," the logistics CEO in 1F grumbled loudly. "Some of us have businesses to run." Julian didn't look at him. Then, the heavy thud of boots on the jet bridge. 3 Port Authority officers boarded. They were big men, geared up, looking for a fight. Preston pointed a manicured finger at seat 1A. Him, he's trespassing, refusing crew instructions. The lead officer, Officer Miller, leaned in. "Sir, you need to come with us." Julian took off the headphones again. He looked Miller in the eye. "I have broken no laws. I have a valid ticket. I am not intoxicated. I am not belligerent. This is a civil dispute regarding a contract of carriage. Sir, once the crew says you gotta go, you gotta go." "It's criminal trespass now," Miller said, his hand resting near his belt. "Don't make us drag you." "I am not walking off this plane," Julian said softly. "If you want me off, you will have to physically remove me. But I am warning you, if you touch me, you are escalating a liability situation that you cannot afford." "Liability," Miller scoffed. "Okay, smart guy." Miller grabbed Julian's arm. Julian went limp. It was a passive resistance technique. He didn't strike back. He didn't pull away. He just became dead weight. "Grab his legs," Miller shouted to the other 2 officers. It happened fast, and it was ugly. They yanked Julian out of the leather pod. His expensive hoodie rode up his back. His book fell to the floor and was kicked under the seat. The actress in 2A gasped and pulled out her phone. She started recording. "Stop, you're hurting him." Sarah, the flight attendant, cried out, hand over her mouth. "Stay back," Preston yelled at her. "He brought this on himself." Julian's head knocked against the armrest of 1B as they hauled him into the aisle. A sharp pain exploded behind his eyes. His glasses flew off, skittering down the carpet. They dragged him, literally dragged him. Like a sack of potatoes, they pulled Julian Thorne, a man whose signature could move markets, down the aisle of the Boeing 777. His face scraped the carpet. His sneaker came off. As they passed row 4, a young teenager in economy stuck his phone into the aisle to get a better angle. The flash went off. Julian didn't scream. He didn't curse. He locked eyes with Preston Walsh, who was standing at the front of the cabin, arms crossed, looking smugly victorious. Julian memorized his face. He memorized the badge number. Preston Walsh, employee number 4922. They hauled him through the galley door and threw him onto the jet bridge floor. The cold industrial carpet smelled of mold. "You're under arrest for disturbing the peace and resisting arrest," Officer Miller panted, kneeing Julian in the back to cuff him. Julian spat a little blood onto the floor. He felt a tooth loose. "Fine," Julian whispered, his face pressed against the floor. "I want my phone call." The holding cell at JFK was a small cinder-block room that smelled of stale urine and despair. Julian sat on a metal bench. His lip was swollen. His $600 hoodie was torn at the shoulder. He was missing one shoe. He sat in silence for 2 hours while they processed his paperwork. They took his fingerprints. They took his mugshot. The flash of the camera was blinding. Finally, Officer Miller opened the door. He looked slightly less confident than he had on the plane. Maybe he had Googled the name. Maybe someone upstairs had whispered something. "You get one call," Miller said, handing Julian his cell phone. "Make it quick. Then we're transporting you to Queen's Central Booking." Julian took the phone. His hands were steady, though his head throbbed with a concussion-like rhythm. He didn't call a criminal defense lawyer. He didn't call his wife. He was divorced. He didn't call the media. He unlocked his phone and scrolled to a contact saved simply as Arthur Vane, CEO Vista. He dialed. It was 7:30 p.m. on a Friday. Most CEOs would be at dinner, but Arthur Vane was a workaholic who lived for his airline. The phone rang 4 times. "This is Arthur," the voice answered, clipped and impatient. "I'm stepping into a gala. Who is this?" "Arthur," Julian said. His voice was raspy, the blood in his mouth changing the timbre of it. "It's Julian Thorne." There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. The tone on the other end changed instantly from annoyance to sycophantic warmth. "Julian, my God, I wasn't expecting to hear from you until the quarterly review next week. How are you? Is everything okay with the refinancing deal?" "I'm currently at JFK," Julian said, "in a holding cell." "What? Why?" "I was just dragged off Flight 882, your Flight 882, by 3 police officers. At the direction of your lead purser, a man named Preston Walsh." Arthur Vane laughed nervously. "Julian, stop. You're joking. You fly private." "Not today, Arthur. I wanted to try the new first-class product you've been bragging about in the investor decks. Instead, I have a split lip, a loose tooth, and I'm being charged with criminal trespass because your purser decided I didn't look like I belonged in seat 1A. The silence on the other end was deafening. You could practically hear the blood draining from Arthur Vane's face. "Julian, please tell me this is a misunderstanding. Tell me you weren't actually dragged." "They pulled me by my ankles, Arthur. My face hit the armrests. I believe it was recorded by about 50 passengers." "Oh my God," Arthur whispered. "Julian, I will call the police commissioner right now. I will have a car sent. I will—" "No," Julian interrupted. The steel was back in his voice. "You aren't going to do anything for me, Arthur. I'm fine. I can handle a night in jail. I grew up in Chicago. I've been through worse." "Then what can I do?" "Name it." "Anything." "I'm calling to give you a heads up out of professional courtesy," Julian said, looking at the dirty wall of the cell. "The refinancing deal regarding the $5 billion debt tranche? The one you need to sign by Monday to keep the airline solvent?" Yes, we have the papers ready to—" "Obsidian Capital is withdrawing the offer, effective immediately." "What?" Arthur screamed. "Julian, you can't. That will bankrupt us. The market opens on Monday. If that deal isn't signed, we trigger a default covenant. The stock will go to zero." "I know," Julian said. "You should probably start drafting a press release." "And Arthur, please, Julian, let's talk about this. Don't destroy the company over one employee. I'll fire him. I'll fire the whole crew." "It's not just the employee, Arthur. It's the culture. You built a culture where a man in a hoodie is trash and a man in a suit is a god. You forgot who actually pays the bills." "Julian." "Goodbye, Arthur." Julian hung up. He handed the phone back to Officer Miller. Miller looked at him. "Who was that?" "That," Julian said, leaning back against the cold wall and closing his eyes, "was the sound of the domino falling." Meanwhile, 30,000 feet over the Atlantic, Preston Walsh was pouring a glass of Dom Perignon for the senator. He felt great. The cabin was quiet. The riff-raff had been removed. He felt powerful. He had protected the integrity of the first-class cabin. He walked back to the galley, humming to himself. Sarah was sitting on the jump seat, looking pale. She was scrolling through her phone. She had purchased the onboard Wi-Fi. "Put that away, Sarah," Preston scolded. "Professionalism." "Preston," she whispered, her hand shaking, "look at Twitter." "I don't care about Twitter." "Look at it." She shoved the phone in his face. It was the #1 trending topic in the world. Boycott Vista. The video was crystal clear. It showed Preston pointing his finger. It showed Julian sitting calmly. And then it showed the violence, the dragging, the blood. But it wasn't just the violence. Someone on the internet, a financial blogger who had been on the flight, had identified the passenger. The caption read, "Vista Airways just beat up Julian Thorne, the owner of Obsidian Capital. The guy who literally owns their debt. R.I.P. Vista." Preston stared at the screen. His stomach dropped out of his body. He felt like he was falling without a parachute. "Who is Julian Thorne?" Preston stammered. "He's a billionaire, Preston," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "He's one of the richest men on Wall Street." The flight deck phone rang, a sharp, piercing double chime. Preston picked it up. It was the captain. His voice was tight, panicked. "Preston, don't serve another drink. Don't speak to another passenger. Corporate just radioed via ACARS. They are screaming." "What the hell did you do down there?" Preston looked at the phone, then at the empty seat 1A, where the bloodstain was still visible on the carpet. He realized with a terrifying clarity that the plane hadn't even landed yet, and his life was already over. While Julian sat on a wooden bench in the holding cell, staring at a graffiti-covered wall that read, "Time waits for no man," the world outside was accelerating at the speed of fiber optics. At Vista Airways corporate headquarters in Dallas, it was 1:00 a.m., but the lights on the 45th floor were blazing. The crisis management team had been assembled. This wasn't the usual B team of PR flacks. This was the war room. At the head of the table stood Veronica Sharp. She was a legend in crisis management. She had buried oil spills, silenced scandals for senators, and scrubbed the internet of celebrity DUIs. She cost $5,000 an hour, but tonight Veronica looked like she had seen a ghost. "Okay, give me the damage report," she barked at a young analyst who was trembling over a laptop. "It's catastrophic, Ms. Sharp," the analyst stammered. "The video has 42 million views across TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram, and that's just the last 3 hours." "We can spin the video," Veronica said, pacing the room. "We release a statement saying the passenger was belligerent, he threatened the crew, and protocol was followed. We dig up dirt on him, find a parking ticket, an ex-wife who hates him, anything. Character assassination is the standard play." The analyst swallowed hard. "We can't do that, ma'am." "Why not? Is he a saint?" "No, because of who he is." The analyst projected a dossier onto the main screen. Julian Thorne, founder of Obsidian Capital. Net worth estimated at $8.4 billion, he sits on the board of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He's a major donor to the Police Benevolent Association. And most importantly, the analyst clicked a button. A pie chart appeared. "He controls the bond notes for our Series B debt. He isn't just a passenger. He is the landlord of this entire company." Veronica froze. She looked at Arthur Vane, the CEO, who was sitting in the corner with his head in his hands. "Arthur," Veronica said slowly, "you dragged the man who owns your mortgage out of his house." "I didn't know," Arthur wailed. "Preston didn't check the VIP list. The manifest just said Thorne." "This isn't a PR crisis anymore," Veronica said, closing her laptop. "This is a death spiral. If he pulls the refinancing deal, we are insolvent by Tuesday." "Call him again," Arthur begged. "I tried," Arthur said. "It goes straight to voicemail, and I just got an email from his general counsel. They aren't suing for damages. They are invoking the material adverse change clause in the lending agreement." "What does that mean?" "It means," Arthur whispered, "they are calling in the loan. All of it, $5 billion, due immediately." At 4:00 a.m., Julian was released from Queen's Central Booking. The charges had been mysteriously dropped. The district attorney, having received a flurry of phone calls from very powerful people, decided there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. Julian walked out of the heavy steel doors into the cool night air. He looked terrible. His lip was split, his hoodie was torn, and he was limping slightly. Waiting for him was a chaotic sea of reporters. The flashbulbs popped like strobe lights, blinding in the darkness. Mr. Thorne, are you going to sue? Did they use a racial slur? Mr. Thorne, is it true you're bankrupting the airline?" A black Cadillac Escalade pulled up to the curb. A large man in a suit, Julian's head of security, David, stepped out and opened the rear door. Julian paused. He turned to the cameras. He didn't smile. He didn't yell. He looked directly into the lens of CNN's camera. "I have no comment on the actions of the police," Julian said, his voice raspy but projecting clear authority. "But to the shareholders of Vista Airways, I suggest you check your portfolios on Monday morning." He got in the car. The door slammed shut. That single clip, 10 seconds long, was played on every financial news network in the world for the next 48 hours. It was the most expensive soundbite in history. The weekend was a bloodbath of speculation, but Monday morning was the execution. The New York Stock Exchange opening bell rang at 9:30 a.m. Usually it was a ceremonial moment. Today it was the start of a massacre. Vista Airways, ticker VSTA, closed Friday at 44.50. At 9:30:05 a.m., the opening orders flooded the system. The sell-side pressure was so immense that it triggered a volatility halt immediately. Trading was paused for 5 minutes. When it resumed at 9:35 a.m., the stock opened at $21. 50% of the company's value, gone in 5 seconds. On the trading floor of Obsidian Capital in Midtown Manhattan, the mood was grimly professional. Julian Thorne sat in his glass-walled office watching the Bloomberg terminals. He was wearing a fresh suit, though the bruise on his cheek was covered with makeup. "Sir," his VP of trading said, stepping into the office, "we are seeing massive dumping of Vista stock. Pension funds are exiting. Retail investors are panic selling. The market cap has dropped $3.2 billion in 10 minutes. "Good," Julian said, sipping his green tea. "Keep the pressure on. Short it." "Sir?" The VP blinked. "You want to short the stock of the company we hold debt in? That's aggressive." "No, I want to short the arrogance," Julian said. "Drive it to single digits." By noon, Vista was trading at $8.50. Arthur Vane was in his office in Dallas, watching his career evaporate. Every phone line was blinking red. The board of directors was convening an emergency meeting via Zoom. "Arthur, you have lost control," the chairman of the board said, his face pixelated on the giant screen. "The lenders are pulling out. The fuel suppliers are demanding cash up front because our credit rating just hit junk status. We are bleeding $10 million an hour." "I can fix this," Arthur shouted, sweating through his shirt. "I'll issue a public apology. I'll go on Oprah. I'll offer Thorne a seat on the board." "Thorne doesn't want a seat on the board, Arthur," the chairman said coldly. "He wants your head. We have to offer him a sacrifice." Arthur went pale. "What are you saying?" "We are terminating you, effective immediately. We need to show the market we are cleaning house." "You can't do that. I built this airline." "You didn't build it. You borrowed money to buy it, and you just pissed off the loan shark. Goodbye, Arthur." The screen went black. Arthur Vane sat in silence. His phone buzzed. It was a notification from his broker. His personal stock options in Vista, which were worth $40 million on Friday, were now worth less than $4 million. He was ruined. But the pain wasn't over. The karma was just getting started, and it was about to land at Heathrow Airport. The silence inside a Boeing 757 at 38,000 feet is usually a comforting white noise. The hum of engines, the rattle of carts, the soft clinking of silverware. But on Vista Airways Flight 882, as it began its initial descent into London Heathrow, the silence was radioactive. Preston Walsh, the lead purser who had ruled the cabin with an iron fist just 6 hours earlier, was now hiding in the rear galley. He was meticulously arranging sugar packets, lining them up with surgical precision just to give his hands something to do. His hands were shaking. For the last 4 hours of the flight across the Atlantic, he had been a pariah in his own kingdom. The pilots had locked the flight deck door and refused to speak to him, communicating only via the interphone with the junior flight attendants. When Preston had tried to bring the captain his scheduled coffee, the first officer had cracked the door and simply said, "Not you, Walsh, send Sarah." Preston tried to rationalize it. "They're just stressed," he told himself, smoothing the lapels of his navy blue vest. "They don't understand the complexities of cabin management. I did my job. I enforced the rules. The company will thank me for prioritizing the operational crew." He clung to that delusion like a life raft. In Preston's mind, he was the hero of the story, the man who made the hard choice. The internet outrage Sarah had shown him, just noise. The Twitter mob didn't sign his paycheck. Arthur Vane did, and Arthur Vane loved a stickler for the rules. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." The captain's voice came over the PA system. It was cold, clipped, and devoid of the usual, "We hope you enjoyed your flight" pleasantries. Preston walked through the cabin to do his final safety checks. As he passed through business class, heads turned. People weren't sleeping. They were looking at their phones. Many had connected to the onboard Wi-Fi and then looking up at him. He saw whispers. He saw fingers pointing. He saw a woman in row 12 shield her child's eyes as he walked by, as if he were a monster. He retreated to his jump seat in the forward galley, buckling the harness tight across his chest. He sat opposite Sarah. She refused to look at him. She stared straight ahead, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "You'll see," Preston whispered to her, his voice tight. "When we land, corporate will have a legal team waiting. They'll brief us. This will all blow over by Tuesday." Sarah finally looked at him. Her expression wasn't angry, it was filled with a terrifying pity. "Preston," she whispered, "you really don't get it, do you?" The landing gear deployed with a heavy thud. The plane banked over the grey, sprawling patchwork of London. The wheels slammed onto the tarmac of Heathrow, the reverse thrusters roaring like a beast waking up. As the plane taxied toward Terminal 3, Preston unbuckled. He stood up, adjusted his tie, and put on his lead purser face. He prepared to say goodbye to the first-class passengers, to smile and thank the senator in 2F. But as the aircraft came to a halt at the gate, the seatbelt sign didn't turn off. Instead, the captain's voice boomed through the cabin again. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We have been instructed by local authorities to hold the aircraft at the gate. No one is to stand up. Customs and immigration officers are boarding the aircraft immediately." Preston's heart skipped a beat. Authorities? A wave of relief washed over him. Of course, they were here to take statements against the passenger. They were here to formalize the charges against Julian Thorne for trespassing. Preston straightened his spine. He would give a full statement. He would be the star witness. The forward cabin door hissed open. A blast of damp, cool English air swirled into the cabin. Two uniformed officers from the London Metropolitan Police, bobbies in high-visibility vests, stepped onto the plane. Flanking them was a man in a sharp charcoal suit. Preston recognized him immediately. It was Mr. Sterling, the Vista Airways station manager for London, a man known for his charm and his terrifying efficiency. Preston stepped forward, a professional smile plastered on his face. "Mr. Sterling, good morning. I can explain the situation with the disruptive passenger." Mr. Sterling didn't stop walking. He walked right past the senator. He walked right past the famous actress. He stopped inches from Preston's face. There was no charm today. "Preston Walsh?" Sterling asked. His voice was loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "Yes, sir. As I was saying, the incident—" "Mr. Walsh, you are to retrieve your personal belongings immediately," Sterling cut him off. His tone was freezing. "You are being removed from this aircraft." Preston blinked. "I don't understand. Are we going to a debriefing?" "There is no debriefing for you," Sterling said. He pulled a tablet from his briefcase. "As of 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, your employment with Vista Airways was terminated for gross misconduct, violation of the outcome-based service protocol, and actions causing catastrophic reputational damage to the brand." The blood drained from Preston's face so fast he felt dizzy. "Terminated? But I have union rights. I have a hearing." "Your union rep has already been notified. They declined to contest the immediate dismissal given the video evidence," Sterling said, checking a box on his screen. "Hand over your company ID badge and your corporate credit card, now." "Mr. Sterling, please," Preston stammered, his hands trembling as he reached for his lanyard. "I live in New York. How do I get home?" Sterling took the badge and the credit card. He slipped them into his pocket. "That is not a concern of Vista Airways. You are no longer an employee. You are a civilian. And since you do not have a valid return ticket and you are currently on a secure aircraft without authorization, these officers will escort you off the premises." "Officers?" Preston looked at the police. "Let's go, mate," one of the officers said, stepping forward and gripping Preston's elbow. It wasn't a gentle grip. "Wait, my bag!" Preston shrieked. Sarah wordlessly slid his suitcase across the galley floor. She didn't say goodbye. Preston was marched down the aisle, but they didn't take him out the side door of the jet bridge, the one used by crew to slip away into waiting private cars. "This way," the officer said, steering him toward the main terminal ramp. "No, please," Preston begged. "Not through the terminal. The press—" "You're a member of the public now, sir. You go out the public exit." The walk was a nightmare in slow motion. Preston Walsh, who had spent 15 years sneering at economy-class behavior, was marched through the long, fluorescent hallways of Heathrow Terminal 3. He was still wearing his uniform, but without the badge, he looked like a costume. He passed passengers who had been on his flight. The logistics CEO from Seat 1F was waiting at passport control. He looked at Preston, smirked, and shook his head. "Calm as a bitch, isn't it?" the CEO muttered as Preston was shoved past the queue. They reached the baggage claim hall, then the customs green channel. Preston felt like a dead man walking. The officer pushed open the frosted glass doors to the arrivals hall. Preston flinched as a wall of noise hit him. He expected the usual airport hum. What he got was a gladiator arena. The British tabloids had been tracking Flight 882 since it took off. They knew exactly when it landed. They knew exactly who Preston was. Flash, flash, flash. A dozen cameras went off at once, blinding him. "There he is," someone shouted. "The bully of Boeing." "Oi, Preston, look here, look at the camera." A mob of reporters and angry members of the public surged forward. The police had to create a barrier. "Did you enjoy beating up a billionaire? How does it feel to lose $5 billion? You're a disgrace." Preston held his suitcase in front of his face, trying to shield himself. He stumbled toward the exit doors, his eyes stinging with tears. Someone in the crowd, a young man in a university sweatshirt, lunged forward and threw the contents of a paper cup. Lukewarm, milky tea splashed across Preston's pristine uniform vest. The crowd cheered. "Shame, shame." Preston burst through the automatic doors onto the curbside pickup area. It was raining in London, a cold, miserable drizzle. The police officers stopped at the door. "Right, you're off the property," the officer said. "Move along." Preston stood on the wet concrete. He was alone. He had no job. He had no flight home. He had no corporate card to book a room at the Hilton. He reached into his pocket for his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He needed to call his landlord in New York. He needed to make sure he still had a safe harbor. He unlocked the screen. There was a text message waiting for him. It had been sent 3 hours ago. From Landlord, Mr. Henderson. "Preston, I saw the news. The building board just called me. They don't want media trucks parked outside our co-op because of you. I'm invoking the morality clause in your lease. You have 48 hours to vacate your things, or I'm putting them on the curb. Don't come back here." Preston stared at the screen, the rain mixed with the tea on his uniform, dripping down his nose. He sat down on his suitcase, right there on the dirty pavement of Heathrow Airport. The luxury cars and black cabs whizzed by, ignoring him. He was the lowest priority on the manifest of life. He put his head in his hands and, for the first time in 20 years, Preston Walsh cried. Not because he was sorry for what he did to Julian Thorne, but because he finally realized that Julian Thorne had destroyed him without lifting a finger. The end of an empire rarely happens with a bang. Usually it happens in a quiet, windowless room, with fluorescent lighting and the hum of an air conditioner. 3 weeks after the incident on Flight 882, the carcass of Vista Airways was being picked clean in the United States Bankruptcy Court for the District of Delaware. The atmosphere inside Courtroom 4B was suffocating. The air smelled of stale coffee and legal pads. On the left side of the aisle sat the remnants of the Vista Airways executive team. Arthur Vane, the once swaggering CEO, looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 days. His suit hung loosely on his frame. He hadn't slept. He hadn't shaved properly. He stared at the mahogany table, unable to look at the gallery behind him. A gallery filled with furious creditors, union representatives, and the press. Vista's stock was effectively dead, trading at pennies on the dollar. The $5 billion debt call from Obsidian Capital had triggered a liquidity crisis that no amount of PR spin could fix. The planes were grounded. The hangars were locked. 12,000 employees were in limbo. "Order," Judge Harrison said, tapping his gavel with a weary rhythm. "We are here to adjudicate the sale of Vista Airways' primary assets under Chapter 11 protection. The court understands there is a stalking horse bidder." The lead bankruptcy lawyer for Vista stood up. He was sweating. "Your Honor, we have struggled to find a buyer. The brand toxicity is unprecedented. Most interested parties only want the landing slots at Heathrow and JFK. They don't want the planes. They don't want the staff. So we are looking at liquidation," the judge asked grimly. "Selling it for scrap." Unless a white knight appears in the next 5 minutes, Your Honor, yes. Arthur Vane put his head in his hands. This was his legacy, scrap metal. Suddenly, the heavy oak double doors at the back of the courtroom groaned open. The sound was loud enough that everyone turned. Walking into the room was not a lawyer. It was not a clerk. It was Julian Thorne. He moved with a slow, deliberate cadence. He was no longer the man in the hoodie. Today he was the Titan of Wall Street. He wore a three-piece suit, cut from midnight blue wool, tailored so sharply it looked like armor. He walked with a cane, a sleek black stick with a silver handle, favoring his left leg where the nerve damage from the dragging incident still flared up on rainy days. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for funerals or executions. Behind Julian walked a phalanx of 6 lawyers from Obsidian Capital, carrying briefcases thick enough to stop a bullet. Julian didn't stop at the gallery. He walked past the rail, straight to the creditors' table. He looked at Arthur Vane. Vane looked up, his eyes widening in horror. He tried to speak, to say Julian, but the words died in his throat. Julian didn't even blink. He looked through Arthur as if he were a pane of glass. Your Honor, Julian said, his voice deep and resonating off the wood paneling. I apologize for the interruption. My name is Julian Thorne. I am the primary debt holder. I know who you are, Mr. Thorne, Judge Harrison said, leaning forward. The court was under the impression you were interested in destroying this company, not saving it. I was interested in accountability, Julian corrected. That has been achieved. Now I am interested in acquisition. A murmur ripped through the room. The press scribbled furiously. Julian signaled to his lead counsel, who placed a single thick document on the judge's bench. Obsidian Capital is placing a bid for the entirety of Vista Airways, Julian announced, turning to face the room. We are not buying the parts, we are buying the whole. We will assume the $5 billion debt load, we will purchase the entire fleet of Boeing 777s, and we will retain 90% of the operational workforce. Arthur Vane stood up, his legs shaking. Julian, you're saving us? Julian finally turned his head. The look in his eyes was colder than the altitude at 35,000 feet. I am not saving you, Arthur. You and the entire C-suite are terminated, effective the moment the ink dries. Your stock options are worthless. Your golden parachutes are voided for gross negligence. You are leaving this courtroom with nothing but the boxes in your hands. Arthur slumped back down, defeated. However, Julian continued, addressing the judge, I have conditions, non-negotiables. Name them, the judge said. First, the name Vista dies today. It is a poisoned word. It represents arrogance and exclusion. The new entity will be known as Ascent Air. Julian rested both hands on his cane. Second, the company policy regarding overbooking is abolished. If a passenger pays for a seat, it is their seat. I don't care if the Pope needs a ride. We do not drag paying customers off our aircraft. We will treat dignity as a commodity more valuable than fuel. The judge looked at the document. He looked at the stunned lawyers on the other side. He looked at Julian Thorne, the man who had been brutalized by the very system he was now buying. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, a small smile appearing, it seems you have the liquidity, and frankly, you have the moral high ground. The bid is accepted. The gavel banged, a sharp, final crack that echoed like a gunshot. Vista Airways was gone. Julian Thorne had just bought his abusers. 2 days later, in a small apartment in Queens, the phone rang. Sarah, the flight attendant who had watched in horror as Julian was dragged away, was sitting on her couch. She was staring at a pile of unpaid bills. She had been let go during the initial bankruptcy freeze. She had applied to Delta, United, and American, but her resume was radioactive. Everyone knew she was on that flight. She picked up the phone, her voice trembling. Hello? Is this Sarah Jenkins? A male voice, calm, familiar. Yes? Sarah, this is Julian Thorne. Sarah stopped breathing. She dropped the piece of mail she was holding. Mr. Thorne, oh my God, sir, I am so sorry. I wanted to help you. I tried to tell Preston to stop, but I was scared and… Sarah, breathe, Julian interrupted gently. I know, I saw the video. I saw your face. You were the only person on that plane who looked at me like a human being. I felt so helpless, she whispered, tears spilling over. You aren't helpless anymore, Julian said. I've just acquired the airline. We're launching Ascent Air on Monday. I'm firing the entire management team responsible for the training protocols that led to that night. He paused. I need a director of in-flight customer experience. I need someone who understands that a ticket isn't just a contract. It's a trust. I don't want an MBA. I want someone with a heart. Sarah gripped the phone. Are you offering me a job? The starting salary is $250,000 a year, plus full equity options. You'll report directly to me. You'll rewrite the manual, Sarah. You'll make sure no one is ever treated like I was. Sarah covered her mouth to stifle a sob. Her life had been falling apart 10 seconds ago. Now the sky was opening up. Mr. Thorne, I won't let you down. I know you won't, Julian said. Welcome aboard. See you Monday. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. JFK Terminal 4 had been scrubbed of the Vista blue and gold. In its place was the sleek matte silver and charcoal branding of Ascent Air. The atmosphere in the terminal was different. The anxiety that usually plagued airports seemed lower here. The staff smiled. They made eye contact. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, identical weather to the night Julian was dragged. Julian Thorne walked through the sliding glass doors. He was traveling to London again, this time to finally see his daughter's recital, which he had missed 6 months ago. He walked toward the exclusive Summit Lounge, the rebranded first-class sanctuary. He approached the reception desk, but he didn't walk in immediately. He stopped. He looked at the man working the janitorial cart near the entrance. The man was wearing a grey, shapeless jumpsuit. He was wearing rubber gloves. He was scrubbing a coffee stain off the pristine white terrazzo floor. He looked older, haggard. His once perfect blonde hair was thinning and unkempt. The arrogance that had defined his face was replaced by a permanent etch of exhaustion. It was Preston Walsh. The fall had been absolute. After the viral video, Preston had been doxxed, fired, and blacklisted. No airline would touch him. No hotel would hire him. He had lost his apartment in the West Village. He had lost his friends. The only work he could find was with a bottom-tier contracting agency that handled the sanitation for the very terminal he used to rule like a tyrant. Preston sensed someone watching him. He looked up from the floor, sweat dripping down his forehead. His eyes locked with Julian's. For a moment, the noise of the terminal faded away. Preston stopped scrubbing. His jaw went slack. He looked at the man in the bespoke suit. The man whose face he had smashed into an armrest, the man he had called lowest priority. Preston's face drained of color. He looked like he wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He gripped the handle of his mop as if it were a lifeline. He waited for Julian to yell. He waited for Julian to call security and have him thrown out. He waited for the anger. But Julian didn't yell. Julian stood there, perfectly still, a statue of calm power. He looked at the name tag pinned crookedly to Preston's jumpsuit. P. Walsh, custodial staff. Julian took a slow step forward. Preston flinched. Julian reached into his breast pocket. He pulled out his boarding pass. It was black and silver, the new design for Ascent Air. Seat 1A. Julian held it up just for a second so Preston could see it. A silent reminder. You missed a spot, Julian said. His voice wasn't angry, it was indifferent. It was the voice of a man who had moved so far past his enemy that the enemy was no longer a threat, just part of the scenery. Clean up on aisle 4, Preston. Julian didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked through the frosted glass doors of the lounge into the warmth and the luxury that belonged to him. Preston stood alone in the hallway. The automatic doors slid shut, cutting him off from the world of the elite. He looked down at the floor, at the stain that wouldn't go away. He dipped his mop into the grey, dirty water, and he went back to work. The karma hadn't just hit, it had settled in for a long, slow shift. The collapse of Vista Airways serves as the most expensive lesson in corporate history. Power is not about the uniform you wear or the title on your badge. True power is often silent, sitting in a hoodie, reading a book. Vista Airways lost $5 billion because they judged a man by his appearance rather than his worth. They forgot the golden rule of business and of life: treat everyone with dignity, because you never know who is sitting in seat 1A. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate karma, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story about justice being served. Who do you think was more at fault, Preston or the CEO? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.